Hello, good morning. Welcome to Propel 2021. I'm Brandon Gabert, and I'm one of the certified consultants at the Answer Company. And today I'm here to review the Sage X3 fixed assets module with you. So if you're here, you're probably thinking that you might need to improve upon your existing system. By and large, what we see is a lot of companies are relying on Microsoft Excel to handle their fixed asset management processes. And it's a crutch that can be removed through the use of the ERP. And one of the main problems that we see in this area is that it's largely a manual process. That you've got lack of control around who's keeping the file and access to the file. It's highly flexible, but potentially error prone if the calculation in the cells gets somehow incorrected. And beyond that, because these are just spreadsheets, we generally have a lack of visibility beyond the finance team and the people who are maintaining those files. So often it can be helpful to move that into the ERP. And what we're going to show today is how Sage X3 can fill that need. So the Sage X3 fixed asset module is going to move that activity from outside the system to inside the system. That means that we get to benefit from all of the other activities that can go on related to the procurement of the asset, including writing purchase orders, doing purchase requests, doing a purchase receipt. And ultimately, those are going to give us better information. We can then link those to an annual capital budget built into X3 and potentially even approval workflows if there's a need there. The neat thing about using the product codes and driving it with products is that all of the financial information that you want to record against those assets as they're procured and as they're depreciated can be built into the product code themselves. So we can actually save some steps and reduce the likelihood of error by driving it with those defaults. Another key point of the exercise is that we are going to have high visibility on expenses which have not been capitalized or enrolled as assets. So oftentimes we will have those scenarios such as construction in process or assets which are not yet ready for use. And so just having visibility on those expenses is a benefit because then you'll know when you haven't completely got all of your assets in order to apply their depreciation. So now we're going to step into X3. If you're not a current X3 customer, then I'm not going to spend a lot of time explaining the different menu options that I'm going into, but I'm going to be describing specific settings on the screen. So let's just head straight into X3. This is our Sage X3 demo folder that we have that I've just prepared for the purposes of this demonstration. The first thing that we're going to look at is the settings on the products that are going to drive those helpful defaults. So I'm going to go to Common Data Products. And I'm on a product code that I created previously. This is for a computer server. It has product code FAST002, so when the user is going to enter the purchase request or the purchase order or purchase receipt or even the purchase invoice, they can refer to this product code. And it will drive all of the relevant financial defaults, such as the accounting code. So the accounting code contains a list of all the GL accounts that are going to be used when this item is purchased, when it's has other types of purchasing type financial impacts. I want to draw your attention to two specific concepts. So the first concept is that Sage can actually have a product that is both an asset as well as an expense. And so let's say that we had some threshold where if we bought a laptop that was more than 1,000, we would just directly expense it versus a laptop that we would capitalize. So in our case, with two circumstances like that, we're going to be making use of the purchasing accounting code line, which is going to tell us that we're driving that to a specific GL account for that activity. So this is more like the purchase and expense sort of scenario. And then we've got line 4 down here, which is the fixed asset. I'm going to show you what that means in just a second. In this case, 17,100 is my fixed asset account. So when I purchase this product using the fixed asset selection, it's going to drive the GL activity to this GL account. And when I purchase it as an expense, it's going to drive it to this GL account. We generally don't see customers who have these two scenarios. So what we're going to do in those cases is we're just going to set the purchasing to the fixed asset account as well. It just allows us to choose, if we need the option to choose, that we would set these two accounts differently. I would still set up the fixed asset account, even though I don't intend for the user to change on the purchase order that they're doing a regular purchase, a normal purchase versus a fixed asset purchase, which would select one of these two accounts. I still would suggest that, just so that way if the user does inadvertently select this other account, that they would still get the same behavior and it wouldn't cause any problems. So let's head on to purchase orders and enter a purchase order. So I've already entered this purchase order. It's already got this purchase order number. And the important bit is that down here on the lines tab, I've added that FAST002 product. I can overwrite the description. So if we actually have, so we can actually control the description that's in use here. This might be a Lenovo server 1234P model, something like that. And so that's going to print on your purchase order and communicate clearly to the supplier what you intend to order. And some of the other relevant settings over here are the gross price. So that's going to be our purchase price. Taxes will be booked accordingly. So if PST is included in the asset purchase, then that can be included in the asset value, and then GST, which might be recoverable, would go to a GST recoverable account just as normal. Over here, we've got this selection under purchase type, fixed asset. So this is the selector between the purchasing accounting code line and the fixed asset accounting code line. So in this case, for this purchase order, I'd selected the fixed asset line, so it would have gone to 17,100. Under the initial setup, this would have gone to that other account, 20200. The next relevant settings here are that we can add in additional dimension values. That's about it for purchase orders, but essentially this activity is going to be carried out by the procurement team. So they will write the PO, they'll send it off to the vendor. So it's just like any other normal purchase for your company. And then we get this benefit of having these uncapitalized expenses upon invoice. So let's look at the next step in the process. Just to note that your existing assets can be easily imported with the Sage out-of-the-box templates. When we get to it, we're going to look at the asset depreciation schedules. And just to note that the out-of-the-box depreciation methods are just as you expect. We've got a declining balance in a straight line. There's also a held for sale depreciation method that won't depreciate if that's a need in your environment. And there is the opportunity to specify other custom methods depending upon what you need. So let's look at asset enrollment though. So I just demonstrated that we had this purchase order, and now we're going to go and enroll that asset. So I'm going to just cancel out of these changes and head into the fixed asset module. Okay, great. So here I am in the fixed asset screen. The first thing that I'm going to do is press the new button to create a new asset. I'm going to go back and select my financial site, and I'm going to hit the capitalize button straight away so that I can find those unenrolled asset expenses. And so in this case, I've got 3 different unenrolled expenses that I could select from. There are functionality here to allow us to search and sort these to more easily find the expenses that we're looking to capitalize. In this case, I'm just going to select one of our items. And when I selected this uncapitalized expense, it went down into the bottom grid, which is where I'm entering those expenses. So it tells me a little bit of information about those expenses. If I had selected multiples, it would have added them up and just indicated what that was. The next thing that I'm going to do is enter my accounting group. So this is setting up some of those defaults. Because this is currently sitting in my construction in process account, it's automatically suggesting to me that I keep it in that, but that's not where I want this to go. This accounting code could have been defaulted in through a different process, the defaulted correct values at the right time. So I'm going to, just for our purposes, set this to a accounting code that I've already set up. Let's just go in and quickly review what those settings are. So I'm going to jump into this accounting code, select my legislation. You won't have this screen in your environment. And I'm going to navigate down to my fixed asset accounting code for the IT machine. And so this is what's required on the account. We've got our fixed asset GL account. So in this case, because it's in KIP, the first thing that's going to happen upon enrollment is the transfer of the financial impact from our KIP account into this fixed asset account. Then we've got our depreciation account. So this is our accumulated depreciation and our depreciation expense. I've also entered in a couple of accounts down here just for demonstration purposes for the profit on FA sale and loss on FA sale. I'm just driving those to the same GL account. That's all there is to this screen. I'm going to press apply, and it's going to bring those settings back into this screen. So it's got the description one, new workstations. I can change this. So this just pulled in from the purchase order, which pulled onto the expense record, which is now pulled into my description one. But I can say that this is the Houston office computers. It's going to get the purchase date from the invoice date, and it's going to default in the in-service date. If we wanted to have a different financial impact, we would be able to just key in a different in-service date there, and the first depreciation will align with that in-service date. There's a variety of other options here I don't really want to go into, but I will mention that it did pull in the family and accounting code in there for us. We're going to scroll straight down here to the depreciation, and here I have to enter a quantity. And here I have to select the depreciation method that I'm going to use. So the ones that we're going to look at are straight line amortization. We're going to look at declining balance amortization, and then held for sale amortization. So just for our purposes, let's start off by looking at the straight line method. And so I've selected that I've got a 3-year duration here. Might be more common to have 5 years for servers, but I said these were workstations, so I'm going to go with that. I'm going to go ahead and create this asset at this point. I've done all of the efforts that required. However, there's other statistical information that we generally like to know about our assets, such as maybe an asset tag number or make or model or serial number, these types of things. So the system provides us with some additional fields at the bottom of an asset, which can be edited and maintained afterwards. It's called the free section. And it's going to have a variety of different data types for us to keep track of. That is asset enrollment and depreciation schedule. So I'm going to select, I could have multiple depreciation plans, although generally in most of our environments, we only have a single plan. It would just allow us to have multiple methods for depreciating an asset in different scenarios and then link that to different ledgers. But that's not going to be relevant in most of our customers' environments. So in this case, I'm going to go in and look at the depreciation plan. As soon as I enrolled that asset, it created the depreciation plan for the first 10 years. And so this is now just allowing me to view that depreciation schedule. So the first 2 years get a very detailed period by period analysis, and then every year, I think it's, I guess for the last 8 years, it's just going to show the annual amount. As we transact through the system, and get to the different fiscal years, we're going to have the granular calculation at that time of those additional fiscal years. So for instance, you'll notice that up here, I'm on the asset depreciation plan. We can see my asset number, the description, and then here we've got our fiscal year depreciation plan. So in this case, we've got the asset being enrolled in I think we said in service was in April there. So that's the first time that we see this depreciation charge. So by clicking on year number 1, it loaded up the period depreciation plan for that fiscal year. And it allows us to see kind of like from current period, which we're on January 2019, just for demonstration purposes right now, we can see that it does start depreciating straight line amortization at that point. Then in fiscal year number 2, we can see that, okay, so this environment's set up just a little bit differently because it's not showing me that periodic view. So this system must be configured to only have 1 year of granular information. So it is a configurable property, but the out-of-the-box setting is 2 years, and this one's clearly 1 year. So that's fine. It does show us, I'll walk through the fields just a little bit because they're important too. So we've got the period start and end, so January. Balance sheet value. Unless we're starting to do impairments and revaluations, we won't see this change. Depreciable value is the balance sheet less residual is depreciable value. Then we've got our accumulated depreciation, which, as you can see, just kind of like is a running total, of course, as you'd expect. And then we've got our periodic charge. And there's some other fields over here that are specific for other situations, but the one that I want to point out and stop by is just the net value field. And so we can see how that decreases over time, as you'd expect. So the way the system works is that it's going to be triggered by specific events. So when we create an asset, that's an event. When we depreciate it, that's an event. When we sell it, that's an event. So there are convenient dashboards which are going to help us make sure that we aren't missing any steps before we close a period. And then the last point that I want to mention are just that invoicing and payment are handled through the standard processes. So as you can imagine, you get the invoice for the fixed asset, you enter it, you pay it just like normal. So the only relevant impact is that there's going to be a follow-up process where we have to enroll that asset. The last things that we're going to be looking at here are how Sage X3 is going to help us drive the asset defaults. And then we're just going to briefly look at the entire posting cycle, just so you can get a sense of what I was describing when I said that there was a dashboard that's going to help us. That's going to be the status of context. And then we'll just review the entries and the closing process. So the first part of this, though, and I think this is the part that demos the best, is that we actually have this actually demos the best because what we can actually do is use the system to drive the defaults from an administrative level so that users who are enrolling assets or are performing other activities within the fixed asset module are going to have sensible defaults presented to them, so there's not as many decision-making points. So I'm just going to go down to setup, fixed assets, and then into the association definitions. We're going to be managing the type of assets that they are, the accounting code that they're going to get, and usually their depreciation method and then depreciation period as well. And if it's a declining balance, then we'll also make use of the depreciation rate field oftentimes. So it has the ability to drive those defaults so that the user doesn't have to make so many decisions when they're enrolling the assets. We don't need to have some finance person in charge of it. So that's definitely a benefit. The next thing that we're going to look at is that helpful dashboard status of contexts. So I'm going to navigate through the menu. What we typically do for our customers is, because the fixed asset cycle is something that you'll touch every month, you'll get to know it pretty well, but also that things have to be done in a specific order. So generally I'll prepare a process map that has the sort of subway diagram look that customers can then rely on to remember the order that they're supposed to do things in. So this isn't necessarily to do with fixed assets, but it's just an example of another another dashboard. So in this case, we're going to fixed assets, and the first thing that we see is status of context. That's great. So I'm going to click on this. It's going to ask us what company that we're going to be inspecting. So every company needs to have its own context reviewed. In our case, we're looking at NA10. And so I've got this magnifying glass here. We're going to get that in a second. Shows me the current period that I'm in, whether I have any inactive assets. Inactive assets don't depreciate, and there's so we definitely want to make sure that all the assets are active prior to closing a period. Whether all the assets are calculated. Generally, we have a feature called auto calculation turned on, so this should never be read in those cases. And then we're going to have a red bubble here for posted. So that means that there's unposted fixed asset events waiting. And the final stop over here is whether I could close this period, and the answer is no, I can't close that period yet. The next thing that we're going to review here is the posting of the accounting entries. So going into the generation of accounting entry screen is going to help us do those account postings. The first thing that I'm going to mention is that we've got this simulation checkbox up here. I'm going to leave that checked for our first run through. And what's going to happen is it's going to just return the resulting journal entry to the log file, but it's not actually going to post the journal entry. So I'm going to select my company. Down here under accounting entry types, I'm going to select all. So this posts all different event types from depreciation to classified for sale, some account transfers, asset cancellation, disposals, and there's a bunch of different event types in here for many different legislations. And because I'm in the demo folder, it's got Great Britain and other things as well. So I just select all because, you know, that's what we need to do to close the period, is to post all the events. So if you can't post all the events, then you can't close the period. So I just say close them to post them all. And I'm going to go ahead and press OK here. We're running in simulation mode. And now we're going to see that it goes through and calculates all the assets and what their depreciation is going to be posted, as well as all the other events types. And as we scroll down here, we can see that we have one journal entry. It says it's posting something to depreciation expense and accumulated depreciation. We can see some other entries down here, I'm sure, as it relates to the transfer between KIP and then into our destination asset account. I don't think there's going to be any other event types that are posted here. So you can just observe the journal entries before they're even posted. But of course, in order to close the month out, we're going to have to run that without that simulation checkbox running. And I'm just going to perform the same activity again, but this time without that simulation checkbox checked. We're going to get the real journal entry. So this time through the log file, instead of actually just printing out the journal entry, it's going to spit out the journal that it created here. Here's the journal number. It tells me some information about it. Let's just go and observe it. This demo system is got a different configuration than we would find in your normal environments, but the general principle is the same. So I'm going to go into accounting entries. Now, we'll note that there is two separate journal entry screens. We've got one for the fixed assets and just those accounting entries belonging to fixed assets. We'll see what the functionality is there, but then also we've got another journal entry screen inside of the financial system. Same journal entries. If I post the fixed assets module, it posts into this journal entry. Journal entries that were posted, as we noted, we have the depreciation. And so here it shows me, some information that you'd expect on the journal entry. I'm not going to go through that. It shows me just the debits and credits. But down here under the detail table, it shows me the asset reference that's been transacted upon, and then the posted charge for that asset. Similarly, in this expenditure account transfer, this is where we're transferring our KIP into our asset account, and we can see some information about that. Because we've now, calculated and posted and done all that sort of good stuff, you can see now that NA10 has 3 green lights across the board, ready to close, yes. So let's go and perform that last little step, and then we can say that we've completed the fixed asset cycle. So under fixed assets, depreciations, period, and FY closing. So again, I've got a simulation. I've got a quick handy shortcut into status of context. Ultimately, what I'm trying to do is just close the period for this company, NA10. And then when I selected it, it told me a little bit of information about what was happening. Because this happens to be the only period in this fiscal year, just due to a configuration change, we are doing the fiscal year close, not just the period close. So when I go ahead and hit OK out of this, it's going to say, warning, the closing period is irreversible. Do you confirm? And I say yes, and it really means that. Sometimes we do know that fine-tune adjustments need to be made to these balances to keep them accurate and true. So if we need to do an accrual, or if we need to do other types of transactions, there are other approaches to managing these balances. But just be sure that this closing process is irreversible. It did succeed, so that concludes the fixed asset cycle. Putting this process inside of your ERP is going to save you time. It's going to improve the coordination between the different departments that are required to procure these fixed assets. And finally, it's going to help us make sure that all of our fixed assets are depreciating properly because they're integrated into the system. If you have any questions or would like some more information, please email us at info@theanswerco or connect with your account manager.